The blood had already dried on the cobblestones by the time I arrived. Not red anymore. Brown, almost black, pressed into the grooves between the stones like something the courtyard had always held and was only now showing. I am not part of the story. I want that understood. I was the physician's assistant, Thomas Wetherall, 26, nobody's heir, nobody's enemy. I had been summoned to Astworth Hall to attend to a fractured collarbone belonging to a groomsman named Price. That was the whole of my purpose. A collarbone, a poultice, a coach ride home before dark. But the horse was still in the yard when I stepped down from the carriage, and no one had covered the body. The animal stood 17 hands. I measured nothing, but you learn to read size when you've treated men trampled by lesser creatures. This was not a lesser creature. It was a gray stallion, almost silver where the light caught its neck, with forelegs thick as fence posts and a chest that moved with the slow mechanical certainty of a bellows. It stood in the northeast corner of the courtyard, loosely tied to an iron ring, and it was watching everything. Not startled, not wild, watching. 2 stable hands flanked it at a distance no closer than 8 feet. One held a crop he clearly had no intention of using. The other held nothing. Both kept their eyes on the stallion's hindquarters the way a man watches a loaded pistol left on a table. The body lay 30 feet from the horse. A man face down, one arm bent wrong beneath him, a stable jacket, wool dark green. The skull had a depression above the left ear that I could see from where I stood, and I have steady eyes, but not remarkable ones. "That's the third," said the coachman who had driven me. "He said it the way you'd report weather." I asked the third, "What?" "Third man that horse is killed." He said it, and then busied himself with the carriage straps, and did not say anything else for some time. I learned the details not all at once, but in the manner things are learned in great houses, sideways, through servants who speak to you only because you are not quite a guest and not quite one of them. You occupy a gap. People put things in gaps. The stallion's name was Donahue. It had been purchased by His Grace, the Duke of Astworth, at auction in Tattersall's 14 months prior. The price was either 200 guineas or 300, depending on which maid you asked, and how much she disliked the stablemaster. The horse had been described in the auction catalogue as spirited. This was, I gathered, an understatement. The first man it killed was a farrier from the village, kicked in the chest while attempting to shoe the left hind, dead before he reached the ground, or so the story went. Stories about quick deaths always go that way. People prefer them clean. The second was a stable boy, 14 years old. He had been found in Donahue's stall one morning with injuries to the head and torso consistent with repeated striking by hooves. Whether the boy had entered the stall on a dare or by instruction was a matter of dispute. The dispute had not been resolved. It had simply stopped, the way disputes stop in houses where one man owns everything, including the right to determine what is worth discussing. The third was the man in the courtyard. His name was Peter Marsh, senior groomsman, 41 years old. He had worked at Astworth Hall for 19 years and was, by every account I received, competent, cautious, and sober. He had been attempting to lead Donahue from the stable to the east paddock when the horse reared, struck him once, and stepped on him twice. This had happened 4 hours before my arrival. The collarbone I'd been summoned for belonged to Price, another groomsman who had injured himself trying to pull Marsh free. So I set Price's collarbone, and then I did not leave. I should have left. There was nothing more required of me. But the body remained uncovered in the courtyard. The horse remained tied to its ring, and no one seemed to be in command of the situation. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Callard, whose face suggested she had been carved from the same stone as the house, told me the Duke was in his study and had given instructions that Donahue was not to be destroyed. I asked if anyone had informed the Duke that a man was dead in his courtyard. "His Grace is aware," Mrs. Callard said. The way she said it made the temperature in the hallway feel lower. I stayed because I could not leave a dead man lying in the open air while a horse that had killed him stood 30 feet away eating from a nosebag someone had, with bizarre servility, thought to provide. I told myself I stayed for medical propriety. That was not entirely true. I stayed because the house felt wrong, in a way I could not yet identify, and I have always been cursed with the kind of curiosity that mistakes itself for duty. The Duke emerged at 4:30. He came through the south door of the house into the courtyard, and every servant within line of sight became very still. Not frightened, exactly. Recalibrated. the way instruments adjust when a new pressure enters a sealed room. He was tall, but not unusually so. Dark hair, cut close, graying at the temples in a way that on another man might have suggested warmth or experience. On him it suggested nothing. He wore riding clothes, not fresh ones. He had been riding that morning before the death. This detail struck me because it meant he had been on a different horse, which meant he kept Donahue not for use but for possession. He walked to within 10 feet of the body and stopped. "Has someone sent for the coroner?" he asked. His voice carried without effort. It was the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it. Mrs. Callard confirmed the coroner had been notified. "Good. And Price?" "The physician's man has set his collarbone, Your Grace." The Duke glanced at me. Brief, evaluative, the kind of look that assigns you a category and moves on. "You may go," he said. To me, I think, though it could have been to anyone. He did not look at Peter Marsh's body again. He looked at the horse. And the horse looked back at him. And what passed between them was not affection and was not mastery. It was something I have thought about many times since and have never adequately named. Recognition, perhaps. The kind that exists between two things that operate by the same rules. The Duke turned and went back inside. The body was covered 20 minutes later by 2 footmen who moved with the careful efficiency of men who understood that the delay had been a message and the covering was another one. I did not leave that evening. The roads, I was told, were unsafe after dark, a fiction so transparent it barely qualified as an excuse. But the housekeeper offered me a room and I took it. I told myself again it was practicality. It was not. It was the girl. I first saw her when they finally moved Peter Marsh's body to the carriage house to await the coroner. She stood at the kitchen entrance, half in the doorway, half out. A maid. Her uniform confirmed that. Young, not pretty in the way that word is usually deployed. Her face was narrow, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her expression into a permanent state of attentiveness. She was thin, the way working people are thin. Not from vanity, but from the simple mathematics of labor and bread. She was watching the horse. Not the body, not the Duke, not the other servants. The horse. And her expression was one I recognized because I had seen it that morning in the courtyard on Donahue's face. She was not frightened. She was reading something. One of the kitchen maids nudged her, and she stepped back inside and was gone. I asked Mrs. Callard who she was. "That is Eleanor. She is nobody." It was the most precise lie I ever heard. I learned Eleanor's surname was Fenton, and that she had been at Astworth Hall for 2 years. She worked in the kitchens, and occasionally served in the upstairs rooms when additional hands were needed. She was quiet. This was said about her repeatedly and by different people, always with the same inflection. Not as a description, but as a classification. Quiet in this house meant something closer to invisible. It meant she did not create problems. It meant she could be forgotten. But I watched her over the next day. I stayed a second night. The roads apparently remained perilous, and what I saw was not invisibility. It was patience. The kind that has a shape to it. The kind that is waiting for something specific. She went about her duties with mechanical precision. Carried trays. Cleared grates. Kept her eyes down in the presence of anyone above her station, which was everyone. But twice I saw her near the stables, not inside them, near them, standing at a distance that suggested she understood boundaries, but was measuring them. The second time, she had something in her hand. A piece of bread, I thought at first, but it was too small, and she held it the way you hold something you are considering, rather than something you intend to use. She saw me watching her, and walked away without hurrying. That was the thing about Eleanor. She never hurried. Hurrying would have meant she thought she owed someone an explanation for where she was and what she was doing. On the second morning, the Duke ordered Donahue exercised. This was received by the stable staff the way a field hospital receives news of a fresh advance. Price was still in his sling. Marsh was still in the carriage house. 2 stable hands whose names I never learned simply refused. They did not refuse loudly or formally. They became unavailable. One developed a sudden limp. The other could not be found. The Duke stood at the stable entrance and waited, and the silence that gathered around him was the silence of men calculating the distance between obedience and survival. "I will ride him myself," the Duke said eventually. No one argued. No one could. He owned the horse, the stable, the ground beneath it, and the livelihoods of every person present. Argument was not a resource available to them. I watched from the courtyard as the Duke entered Donahue's stall alone. I heard the horse shift, a sound of weight redistributing, the jingle of a bit being forced between teeth. Then the Duke led the stallion out, saddled, and the animal came with him, but not willingly. Donahue's ears were flat, his nostrils flared in a rhythm that suggested calculation rather than panic. The Duke mounted. The horse stood still for 3 seconds. I counted, and then exploded. There is no other word. The stallion bucked with a violence that seemed to reorganize the air around it. The Duke stayed seated through the first 3 bucks, which was impressive, and was thrown on the 4th, which was inevitable. He landed on his back in the dirt, and the horse reared over him, and for one moment the geometry was very simple. Hooves above skull, gravity willing. The Duke rolled. The hooves struck earth. 2 stable hands rushed forward with ropes. Donahue screamed, a sound I had not known horses could make, closer to metal tearing than anything organic, and kicked one of the ropes free. And then a voice. Not loud, not sharp. A voice so low it should have been swallowed by the chaos of the yard. Khaled? The horse stopped. Not gradually, not with the stuttering deceleration of a startled animal returning to sense. Donahue stopped the way a door closes. Completely. One instant in motion, the next still, his hooves planted, his great sides heaving, his eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway where Eleanor Fenton stood, with her hands at her sides, and that single word still hanging in the air between them. Nobody moved. The Duke was on the ground. The stable hands had dropped their ropes. Mrs. Callard, who had come to the door at the noise, had one hand on the frame as though the house itself needed steadying. Eleanor did not step forward. She did not explain. She stood where she was, and the horse watched her, and for the first time since I had arrived at Astworth Hall, Donahue's ears were up. The word was Irish. I did not know this at the time. I learned it later, the way I learned everything at Astworth Hall, through gaps, through silences shaped like confessions. Khaled. It means harbor, or port, a place where water stops moving. The Duke got to his feet. He brushed the dirt from his coat with the slow, deliberate motions of a man reassembling his authority one gesture at a time. He did not look at Eleanor immediately. He looked at the horse first, as though Donahue's stillness were a mechanical failure he might diagnose through observation. Then he looked at the maid. What did you say to him? His voice was level, not curious, demanding, but with the restraint of a man who understood that visible anger would concede something he was not yet prepared to concede. A word, Your Grace. Eleanor's hands remained at her sides. One he knows. How does he know it? She did not answer. The Duke waited. Eleanor waited longer. This was, I understood even then, a contest, and the terms were being set not by who spoke, but by who could tolerate silence. The Duke broke first, not dramatically. He turned to the nearest stable hand and ordered Donahue return to his stall. Then he walked back into the house without looking at Eleanor again. She returned to the kitchen. The yard emptied. The morning resumed its shape as though nothing had fractured it. But something had. I sought out Price that afternoon to check his collarbone. He was healing well enough, though the sling irritated him, and he kept adjusting it with his good hand like a man arguing with himself. I asked him about the horse's history before Astworth. Irish bred, Price said. Connemara cross. The Duke bought him at Tattersall's, but the horse came over from County Galway. A estate sale, I think. Some lord who died without issue. I asked if the horse had been violent before arriving at Astworth. Price gave me a look that contained more intelligence than his station typically permitted him to display. Donahue was green when he arrived. Nervous. Not killer nervous, just young. He didn't know this place. And now? Now he knows it very well, Price said. That's the problem. I asked Price about Eleanor. His face changed. Not much. A tightening around the jaw. The kind of adjustment a man makes when he's about to say something he has thought about often and shared with no one. She came the same year as the horse, he said. Within a month of each other. I thought that was a coincidence for a long time. He did not say what he thought now. He adjusted his sling and looked out the window toward the stable yard and let the sentence stand without a conclusion, which was conclusion enough. That evening I saw something I was not meant to see. I had gone walking after supper. The house oppressed me. Its hallways were too long and too quiet, and smelled of beeswax and something underneath the beeswax that I did not care to identify. I walked the grounds toward the east paddock, and as I rounded the stable block, I heard a sound that stopped me. The horse was humming. No, that is wrong. The horse was breathing in a particular rhythm, deep, slow, with a vibration in the exhale that was almost vocal. A sound of contentment so profound it seemed to belong to a different animal entirely. Eleanor was in the stall. She stood with her back against the far wall, one hand resting on Donohue's neck. Not stroking, resting. The horse's head was lowered to her hip, his eyes half closed. She was speaking to him in a voice so quiet I could not make out the words, only the cadence. It was Irish. The rhythm was unmistakable, even without comprehension. Those soft vowels, that falling music. She had not entered through the stable door. I checked later. The rear wall of Donohue's stall had a feed hatch, narrow but wide enough for someone as thin as Eleanor to slip through. She had been coming this way for some time. The hatch's latch was worn smooth. I stood in the dark and watched the most dangerous horse in the county rest its head against the kitchen maid, like a child leaning into its mother, and I understood that everything I had assumed about Astworth Hall was arranged precisely backwards. The horse was not violent. The horse was afraid, and it was afraid because the only person who spoke its language had been kept from it, deliberately or otherwise, for 14 months. I contrived to speak with Eleanor the following morning. This required strategy. She was not avoiding me specifically, but she moved through the house the way water moves through limestone, always present, never catchable. I found her in the scullery, alone, scrubbing a pot with the grim focus of someone who has made peace with repetition. "You're from Ireland," I said. She did not look up. "County Galway." "Same estate as the horse." Her hand stopped moving. She still did not look up, but the quality of her stillness changed. It acquired weight. "I worked in the stables there," she said. "Since I was 12, I trained Donohue from a foal. I was the only one who handled him." "And when the estate was sold?" "The horse was sold to Tattersall's. I was sold to a registry office in Dublin and placed in service in England." She resumed scrubbing. "They are not so different, the two transactions." I asked why she had not told anyone she knew the horse, why she had let 3 men die when a word from her could have prevented it. She looked up then. Her eyes were the color of river stones, gray, flat, depthless in the way that very deep things appear depthless from above. The expression in them was not guilt. It was not defiance. It was the expression of someone who has performed a calculation so many times that the numbers no longer carry any feeling. "I told Mrs. Callard the week I arrived," she said. "I told her I knew the horse. I told her his name. I told her he needed handling by someone familiar. She informed His Grace." "And?" "His Grace said the horse would be trained to his standard, not to the habits of an Irish stable girl." She returned to the pot. The conversation, as far as she was concerned, was over, but the information sat in my chest like a stone swallowed whole. 3 men had died because the Duke had been told how to prevent their deaths and had chosen not to. Not from ignorance, from pride. The horse would be trained to his standard. The words had the ring of something repeated often in great houses, applied to horses and servants and tenants and anyone else whose existence was subordinate to the architecture of authority. Eleanor had told him. He had refused. And then the dying had started, and each death had calcified the Duke's position, because to accept her help after the first death would have been to admit he had been wrong before it. After the second, the admission would have been twice as costly. After the third, it was impossible. The Duke was now defending not a training philosophy, but a sequence of decisions, each one mortared to the last. Eleanor knew this. She had known it from the beginning. That was why her patience had the shape it did. Not the patience of someone waiting for permission, but the patience of someone watching a structure weaken from the inside, stone by stone, knowing that the final collapse would not require her to push, only to be standing in the right place when it fell. The coroner arrived on the 3rd day, a man named Hallett, methodical, unimaginative, inclined to record what he could measure and disregard what he could not. He examined Peter Marsh's body, interviewed the stable hands, and produced a verdict of accidental death. This was expected. Coroners in the employ of county estates do not produce unexpected verdicts. The machinery is not built for it. But Hallett mentioned in passing that there would be a report filed with the magistrate, and that 3 deaths by the same animal in 14 months would attract attention regardless of individual verdicts. He said this to Mrs. Callard. He said it within earshot of the Duke's study door, which was open. He may not have intended it as a warning. It functioned as one. The Duke summoned Mrs. Callard that afternoon. I know this because I was in the hallway outside, checking on Price, I claimed, though Price was in the opposite wing. The door was not fully closed. The horse must be destroyed, Mrs. Callard said. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who has abandoned persuasion in favor of fact. The magistrate will require it regardless, Your Grace. Better it comes from you. Silence. 3 men, Your Grace. I am aware of the number. More silence. Then, there is also the matter of the girl, Eleanor. If it is known that she has a connection to the horse, and that this connection was reported and disregarded. It was not disregarded. It was deemed irrelevant. The distinction may not survive scrutiny, Your Grace. The door closed. I heard nothing further. But later that evening, 2 things happened in quick succession. First, the Duke ordered the farrier summoned for the following morning. The instruction was understood by every servant who heard it. You do not summon a farrier for a horse you intend to keep. You summon a farrier because he owns the tools and the knowledge and the nerve to put a horse down, and because the task must be done by someone who is not a gentleman. Second, Eleanor disappeared. Not from the estate, from visibility. Her duties went unperformed. Her bed in the servants' quarters was empty. Mrs. Callard sent 2 maids to find her. They returned without her. The house, which had operated for 2 days under the dull compression of tragedy, now acquired a different tension. The specific, electrical quality of a situation that is not yet declared what it is. I found her, though I cannot claim credit for superior detection. I knew where she would be. She was in Donohue's stall, not through the feed hatch this time, through the front door, in full view of anyone who cared to look. She sat on the straw with her back against the wall, and the stallion stood over her with his head low and his breathing slow, and she had one hand on the place where his jaw met his neck, the place where you can feel a horse's pulse if you know where to press. They're going to kill him, I said. Yes. You could stop it. If you spoke to the magistrate, if you told him what you told Mrs. Callard, what you told the Duke. 3 deaths, and the man who owned the horse was warned and refused. I know what I could do. Her voice was not angry. It was not sad. It was the voice of someone holding a weapon and deciding, with full clarity, when to use it. Why are you waiting? I asked. She looked at me. That riverstone gaze, flat and deep simultaneously. Because he hasn't asked me yet. The Duke came to the stable at dawn. I was already there, standing outside Donohue's stall like a man who had lost the ability to leave a place he had no business being. The farrier was behind me, a silent man with a leather case. Mrs. Callard stood at the stable entrance. 2 footmen flanked her. The morning was cold and gray and smelled of frost and hay and the iron tang of what was about to happen. The Duke walked to the stall door and saw Eleanor inside with the horse. His face registered nothing. He had, I suspect, expected this. Step out, he said. Eleanor stood. She did not step out. Donohue shifted behind her, his massive head rising, his ears flattening. The horse knew. Animals always know. The horse is to be destroyed, the Duke said. You will step out of the stall. You could keep him alive, Eleanor said. I've shown you that. One word and he's gentle. I can make him safe. I've always been able to make him safe. Step out. But you'd have to say it was me. You'd have to let them know a kitchen maid from Galway could do what the Duke of Astworth could not. That's what this has always been. Not the horse. You. The stable was silent. The farrier behind me had stopped breathing. Mrs. Callard's hand was on the doorframe again, white-knuckled. The Duke's expression did not change. That was the most terrible part. Nothing moved in his face. The calculation happened behind surfaces that had been trained since birth to reveal nothing. What do you want? He said. 3 words. 3 dead men. And the Duke of Astworth, who had never in his life asked a servant what they wanted, had just asked a kitchen maid to name her price, because the alternative was a magistrate's inquiry in which the central fact, that he had been told and had refused would become a matter of public record. The horse's destruction would not bury it. Eleanor's silence was the only thing that could. She knew it. He knew she knew it. That was the architecture of the moment, and it was hers. "I want the horse," she said. "Signed over to me. A letter confirming I reported the danger and was ignored, held by a solicitor of my choosing. And a cottage, one of the empty ones on the North Estate. Freehold. A kitchen maid, asking for property, from a duke." The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted because counting was the only thing I could do. "Agreed," the duke said. He turned and walked out of the stable. He did not look at the horse. He did not look at Eleanor. He walked past Mrs. Callard, past the footman, past me, and into his house, and the door closed behind him with the soft, definitive sound of a man entering a room where he would not have to see what his pride had cost him. Eleanor leaned her forehead against Donohue's neck. The horse exhaled, that deep, slow, almost vocal sound. She did not cry. She did not smile. She pressed her hand flat against his chest and felt his heartbeat, steady beneath her palm, and the stallion who had killed 3 men stood in his stall and breathed and was still, because the only person who had ever known his language had finally been allowed to speak it. I left Astworth Hall that morning. The roads, it turned out, had been safe all along. I passed the north cottages on my way out, small, stone, set back from the lane behind hawthorn hedges gone wild with neglect. In one of them, within the month, a woman would live who owned a horse and a piece of paper that could destroy a duke, and the duke would know it every day for the rest of his life. The carriage rattled over the bridge, and I looked back once. The hall sat on its hill, immense and gray and permanent. But permanence, I had learned, is a matter of perspective. Stone is permanent until water finds the crack. Eleanor Fenton had found the crack. She had not made it. She had simply known where it was and waited, and when the moment came, she had not asked for justice. She had asked for leverage. And leverage, unlike justice, does not require anyone's agreement to work.